Welcome. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Craig. Good to be with you.
Also good to see you, and thank you so much for taking the time and just hanging out and being with us and educating us and talking to us. And
Like
you
old
know,
times.
like all times, that's right. The one thing that I've always respected and loved about what you do is you take this extraordinarily complex conversation and you make it so easy to understand and put it into words that the layperson can really connect to. So I'm hoping we're gonna just have our journey today.
Good, great. And the reason I do it that way is because I got to figure it out. I have to, none of my ideas are original. Everything that I teach is somebody else's original science or discovery. I just have to figure out how to translate it from the language that the person used to publish it into something that makes sense to me. And then I get a great kick out of sharing it with other people because to me, it's really exciting stuff.
It is extraordinary, exciting stuff. We absolutely um, love having the ability to be able to dissect the work and really take a look at the underneath the hood, so to speak. Right? Just lift the hood and take a look and see what's going on underneath it. And Carol, let's start off. Where are you these days? What are you doing? What's going on? Where are you?
Well, I moved from Miami to Maine, to just south of Portland, Maine, in the beach community, Scarborough, Maine. And we have 7 beaches here. But coastal Maine is very different from coastal Miami. Um, but I enjoy it very much. We live in the woods. We live in the forest that's on the edge of the marsh, which is on the edge of the ocean, just a mile and a half in from the ocean, in southern Maine. Um, and so I have the seasons again. I didn't grow up in Maine. I grew up in Pennsylvania, but my sister moved here in 1983 and reared her children here. And so I just realized that when I retired, that what I wanted to do, if I wasn't committed elsewhere, was that I'd retire to where Sue was. And we actually share a big house together in Maine. And I have my Maine license, but I haven't been treating patients as a professional manual therapist, physical therapist. I do co-treat with the person who gives me my Barnes myofascial release. She gets a complicated patient every once in a while, and she asks if I'll come in and see this person with her. So I do patient care in that way, once or twice a month. And then I have done a kind of a quasi study group, getting the Barnes
Right.
practitioners from New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Maine together. And that has to be a little bit more formalized. And then the other thing, that a main thing that I'm doing is teaching. I'm teaching these Zoom lectures um, about fascia and about um, the the physiology of fascia, which is biotensegrity, and about how this marvelous life goes on, how it's sustained, how it's created, and then how it's sustained, and how it works, how the systems all work together, and then what gets in the way of the efficiency of the systems, which we call disease or disability, and then what we do, especially in manual therapy, but also in exercise, um, helps to restore balance and integrity for the systems to be able to work well together. Of course, that's fascia.
Yeah.
And so there are all kinds of conferences, international conferences that are going on, and groups that are devoted to studying fascia and devoted to sponsoring talks about the science of fascia from different perspectives. The perspective that I feel most comfortable in is the perspective that I learned as a John Barnes myofascial release physical therapist. That's the first glimpse I got of this wonderful holistic web. And from then on, I kind of just kept reading and reading because I wanted to understand the science behind it. And I've been doing that now for 28 years, full
So
time.
So let's jump in right there. That's a great place to start. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the difference between John Barnes' method of myofascial release versus the internet's version of myofascial release these days that we see so often in these little 30-second clips?
Yeah. Well, myofascial release is kind of a generic phrase, kind of like Xerox or Kleenex. Um, it's the myofascial release that John Barnes trademarked when he developed his principles, is very specific, and it's oriented toward some principles that if you don't follow them, you can't say that you're doing authentic myofascial release, Barnes method.
Right.
But anybody who does structural work or does manual therapy, is influencing the fascia and the flow inside of us through what Donald Ingber discovered was mechanotransduction. Now that sounds like a fancy word, but it really is just energy. When you hear the word transducer, you're always thinking about energy.
Right.
It's finding energy and changing it in some form. So what we found out was when we touch anywhere on our skin, the infrared energy in our palms and the presses into the skin, and there are special skin is embedded in fascia. So we have fascia from the outermost layer of our skin to the innermost layer of our bones. There's no ending to this. But there are receptors just under the skin that are fascial receptors. They're pressure receptors. And what happens is they pick up this image, this pressure, and then the infrared energy, flow it down to what we used to call the free nerve endings. There are no free nerve endings.
Right.
They're surrounded in schwanz. They're surrounded in fascia, but the fascia itself is sending this electronically uh, down to those free nerve endings. It comes up through the interoceptive nervous system, up to the somatosensory cortex, and also to the interoceptive system. So we get to perceive it that way. Anybody touching in any way is going to have that effect. In fact, us sitting on our bums is having that effect because it's pressure. But
Right.
when it's a person versus, let's say, a soft ball or a roller, the person's energy now is getting into the mix, that infrared energy, and that's also affecting fascia. And what Barnes found out was gentle pressure, not the deep knuckle pressure or elbow pressure, but gentle pressure. Go down to where the person pushes back, and then open up your hands. So it's pressure and elongation of the fascia through the skin, using the skin as a tool, and then waiting there at the barrier where you get stopped, and
Yeah.
then waiting there at what he calls the fascial barrier. And then you wait, and pretty soon you'll start to feel this kind of rumbling waving underneath your
Right.
hand. And you just focus on it and you stay with it. And it opens up and it opens up. And what we're finding out is because of the nature of the soft tissue of fascia, the ground substance, it's a type 2 gel. And what happens with pressure and temperature, it melts and it actually becomes thinner, becomes less stiff, more
Hmm.
compliant. And then when you take your hands off, it becomes hydrated. It's like a reverse osmosis, and fluid comes in from the capillaries. And so then people get up off the table and say, "Oh, I feel so much lighter." And they felt this all through their body, not just where we were working. That's in contrast to, at the most foundational physical therapy ways of massage and trigger point release, and it's a linear method. You're looking at one problem in a shoulder and you're staying with that shoulder, and you're manipulating the tissue and trying to tear at those cross links. That's very different from what John Barnes suggests. Barnes is a holistic you
Yeah.
process. You evaluate where the restrictions are. You treat the restrictions in on the table or sitting or standing, but in the special principled way of pressure and elongation. And then you wait 3 to 5 minutes, and then you go on to the next one and next one, wherever the fascia seems to be calling, so to speak, for anywhere from 20 minutes to 50 minutes. And then fascia gets to take in this information. All energy flow is information in the body. The cells are picking up information. Now, we don't know what the nature of that information is when a therapist is treating a patient. We have some suspicions, but I don't want to go there. All I want to say is the cells now can talk to one another because the fascia is opened up. Those restrictions are like hard leather. It's that condensing of the fluid of the polysaccharide ground layer, and the stiffness keeps the cells that are embedded in it from talking to one another, from sending out messenger molecules, for the immune system sending in T cells, or the even glucose getting to the cells, and hydrogen being able to get out of the cells, which is cellular respiration through the membrane. Every cell is embedded in this fascia. So just outside the cell membrane is the fascia, and the microtubules of the fascia are bringing this information in through the membrane of the cell, through what we call integrins, these little protein molecules, right. And it goes through into the cytoplasm, where there are more tubules, into the nucleus, where there are more tubules, into the DNA. So as Ingber found out, mechanotransduction communicates directly with the nuclei of cells. And what Barnes found out is you can open up stuck fascia, which is causing alignment problems and pain, pressure on pain-sensitive organs and vessels and lymphatics, nerves. You can open that up, and people then become less in pain, more able to move freely. And then we finish that up, and you're a master at this, in giving beautiful functional exercises that allow that fascia that now has been opened up to support the muscles and to facilitate muscle contraction. We know that muscles by themselves can't contract. It has to be the myofascial working together to tense that muscle, and then the ligaments move in the way that we need to.
Right. Thank you so much. That's a great answer. It's fantastic. But I want to come back to what you were talking about when we lay our hands upon another person, and the resonance of that energy that takes place and what's going on underneath your hands in that moment. Can you talk a little bit about the time? What's happening? Why 3 to 5 minutes? Why is there a time frame on there? And then let's go further beyond that about how, and we talk about the functional exercise that kind of comes into it based on tensegrities. And can you speak a little bit about how, number one, what's going on with those hands for 3 to 5 minutes? What's taking place on a chemical nature, and how those cells are starting to communicate a little bit better as the fascia becomes a little bit more hydrated and a little bit more open? And how, from a tensegrity perspective, does that allow for greater fluid mobilities?
Well, that's a very good question. When John is asked why 3 to 5 minutes, John always responds, or most of the time that I've heard him respond, he responds, "That's nature's way." You can't expect to rush this process. Many of these restrictions we're dealing with got planted there many, many years ago, and they just got piled on top of the other, one on top of the other.
One trauma on top of the other.
Right. We get rid of one density, and then we're down to another density, and then down to another density. So that's the response to that question. Now, biotensegrity. It turns out that fascia is the container for an energy system inside of us that functions to keep the cells open and to be a network of flow, of all the flows within the body that are absolutely necessary for human function. Let's use an analogy. Well, tensegrity, first of all, is the name of an architectural structure that is characterized by discontinuous struts held together by a continuous web of elastic or string. And then there are no pillars in it. It's just an open, usually an icosahedron. It's an open sphere of some sort, where these struts don't touch each other, but the string just goes around and connects them all and keeps it open. And it's analogous to a balloon that is rubber or plastic on the outside, and you blow it up with air. And the air from the inside is pushing out on the skin of the balloon, and the skin and the atmospheric pressure is pushing in on the air on the inside of the balloon, and then you are able to keep a shape. And that's that energy that we receive. It's present in the sperm, it's present in the egg, and when the fertilized egg becomes an embryo, that energy then becomes our energy. And it is a wisdom energy that's able to, we don't know, there's speculation about where it came from to begin with.
Right.
I hold with those, and James Oshman also, who claim that that energy comes from what we call the quantum plenum, the field, the 0 point field, the atmosphere that is so dense with energy. We know that already. The physicists know that. Each cubic centimeter is 10 to the 9 joules of energy, a cubic centimeter. So we know that there's energy out there. And we think that that energy is what, from the Big Bang forward, fueled the making of the stars, and then the making of our planet and the making of human life on the planet. So what's the function of that energy in the embryo? Well, you've seen embryos develop, and you know that they kind of, there's the egg, and then there's 2 cells, and then there's 4 cells, then there's 8 cells, and then there's 16 cells, and then there's 32 cells. And this is a self-organizing development of zygote and into a living being, whether it's a salamander or a tadpole or a human being. They're following, the energy is reading the DNA blueprint. Every cell is like every other cell in terms of genetic composition, but there's some wisdom in there that turns stem cells into the appropriate cell of the heart, into the appropriate cell of the brain or the gut or the limbs as they come out. And the brain starts up here, or the heart starts up here above the brain, and it drops down to the center, and the lungs unfold around it, and then the little limb buds go out from that, and then the legs come down. That's following the blueprint of the DNA, but it's energetically fueled by this push-pull of biotensegrity energy. And each of the cells inherits that push-pull, so that the fibroblast, if you see a picture of it, there's a nucleus, and then the cytoplasm is out here, and you can see the mitochondria flowing out toward the cell membrane. It's really beautiful. I use that in my slides to say this is an example of the force field of biotensegrity. Now, nobody ever, as Steve Levin, the founder of biotensegrity, said, he started to put this together. He said that, the biomechanics that we learned in school, as an orthopedic surgeon, there aren't any levers in there that are capable of holding a dinosaur's tail up for 50 yards behind it. And then what they realized, that the old model was based on the only thing that we knew, and that was Newtonian solid state physics. And so we looked at the body as a cluster of parts that came together as a whole, but the whole was no more than the sum of the parts. And that's what dissection did for us in the 1600s.
Right.
And what Descartes did when he made that first dissection, and we opened up the energy field to look at the parts, we lost the realization that this is a field that is populated with cells that have certain function. And instead, we only saw the pieces. Now, fascia science has moved on, and with the genesis of Jean-Claude Guimbarteau's wonderful film, Strolling Under the Skin, which you have on your website, I think. I'm not sure.
We do.
That you can look through a small incision. They took a tube with a camera and a light at the end and magnified fascia 10 times and then more than that. And you could see it was nothing like the fascia that we studied in physical therapy school or medical school or in cadaver dissection. That's dead fascia. And it's like studying a telephone pole.
Right.
And than trying to figure out how a tree works.
But that's what
Um,
happened, many years ago when they were doing the dissections. They took a look at, they opened up the body,
yeah,
a non-living human at the time, and they discarded the fascia.
yeah,
Um,
they threw it away. They thought it was not important at all. And it
right.
turns out it's the most important. Nothing else can function without it.
And that's part of the biotensegrity structure that allows that 50-foot tail of the dinosaur to be able to held up, because we now
That's right.
know that fascia is not in layers.
That's right. It's
It's ever
densities.
present in multi-dimension
Right.
and based on
It's
density,
a
please.
web of densities. Right. Right.
And so the way we used to study fascia, like we said, we study a
Yeah.
cadaver much like we would study a telephone pole, because it was on a
That's what
non-living
we had.
human,
Yeah.
right? That's what we had at the time. How has the study of fascia moved forward? Where are we today? I mean, you mentioned James Oshman and his energy medicine, and Steve Levin and the dissection techniques, and Jean-Guillaume Berthaud, the strolling under the skin, has now really shown us in living humans how to study fascia. Where has it gone to? Where is it going to?
Well, I think one of the really phenomenal discoveries was that fascia is the conduction system and of energy and information in the body. Without
Mm,
fascia, cells couldn't get the information they need to function. So it's
yeah,
the literal root, the copper wire conduction of information into the fascias. That information takes place in different ways: fluids, subatomic particles, hormones, cytokines, little messenger molecules. How do the platelets know and the fibrinogen know to come and close that wound
right.
in milliseconds? I mean, they're on their way. How does the information get to the blood to send that material in to stop that bleeding? Um, and Candace Burt's book, Molecules of Emotion, opened up the whole fluid nervous system, the neurotransmitters and the neuropeptides and the steroids and the hormones that are flowing through the fascia. Um, and that is information. It's run by the pituitary gland, but it's part of the immune system, part of the endocrine system, part of the digestive system, all runs on these messenger molecules. There's more um, the endocrine glands in our gut brain is more massive than the cells in our brain and our head, because it's sending in information about digestion, about
Right.
moving the peristalsis on or slowing it down. The neuroendocrine system turns out to be a very important system. All of this is embedded in fascia. And I love to use James Oshman's quote. I have it right here so I don't forget it. James Oshman said, fascia is a semi-conducting liquid crystal matrix which stores and processes vast amounts of subliminal information, of non-neural information. And it's the primordial matrix of consciousness. Now, what fascia science is finding out is that, along with Ingber's ideas of mechanotransduction, along with the study of what happens with pressure and temperature on the gels, along comes Gerald Pollack. And he says this water inside our cells is not like any water that we have outside of our cells. That H2O that's taken in through the gut gets transformed from an H2O, two hydrogen, one oxygen molecule, kind of a cube like,
Yeah.
into a crystalline flat. That's how you know you've got a crystal. It's a flat and it's got hexagons in it. It's H3O2. That's crystalline. You push on it and the electrons, it's very unstable. Electrons are flowing all over the place. But what we found out was the collagen of the fascia. Collagen, it really makes most of our body, and there are 13 many forms of collagen, but it's always a triple helix. So what's that mean? A triple helix? Well, it spirals around itself, and then it's got these little projections. And the H3O2, the electrons hook onto the little projections,
Mhm.
and they hydrate the collagen. And that, when that's pressed on, pressure, then that impacts the collagen. But collagen resists change, structural change. But that heat and that long term, 3 to 5 minutes, starts to get that collagen and unfold it. It unfolds the elastin. So it's like
Right.
origami that's been all kind of mushed together in our fascial restrictions. And then when we press on it, it starts to unfold, and it takes its shape that it's supposed to, so that fascia can be open and reorganize itself. And then I think the newest forms of fascia research that are really relevant are to show that this John Sharkey and Joanne Avison actually have coined the term fasciategrity,
Yeah.
that fascia, because fascia and biotensegrity can't be separated. Fascia exists so that biotensegrity can function. And as biotensegrity functions, it brings us into balance and allows us to move functionally in ways that fuel our system in healthy ways. And when we've got disease or disability or illness, we're not moving well. Certain parts are moving and certain parts are stuck. And so the role of the physical therapist, especially, but other people too, but primarily physical therapists, what we do is analyze, where is this person limited, and what's causing the limitation in movement, because we're movement specialists.
And it
And
might not be at the site of the limitation.
right, it's because the web is throughout. And you might have torn your hamstring, which pulled and you nursed it a little bit and it kind of got better, but it pulled the pelvis down. And then the pelvis on the other side, wait, and it starts pulling the lungs down, the fascia around the lungs, which goes up into your neck, and they come into us with neck pain. Well, if we just treat that neck pain and we don't look at where are the other restrictions, we're going to find that hamstring and then open up the whole system. That's why we say at least 4 to 6 beginning sessions to let us get a sense of what's happening inside, what we can change, what's possible, working with the person, sending them home with functional exercises, so that then once we get the fascia cleared of the restrictions, then they can move and restore that openness of the collagen and keep it open with yoga, with Pilates, with functional exercises, with kettlebells, on the inversion table, with the TheraBand for resistance, walking. I'm not a real fan of walking on treadmills because of the impact on the soft tissue and the knees. A little bit of an incline might be better, but anyway, the elevated the treadmill that you have that makes people lighter allows them
Ultra
to
G.
move. Yeah, and that's what Pilates does with the springs. People say, well, I can't do that anymore. Well, then all of a sudden you're doing that and it's open to you. I was wrong, my perception was wrong, and that comes down to the main part of how fascia science is advancing. That's sentience, that's perception, that's consciousness. And every moment that we perceive something, anything, that perception, of course, is picked up by our exteroceptors. They're vibrator receptors: light, sound, taste, touch, and smell.
Mm-hmm.
We take in the sensory input. The vibrating, the exteroceptor translates it into energy, sends it to the brain for being able to read it. Well, the interoceptive system, which is those non-myelinated, mostly non-myelinated free nerve ending cells.
Right.
They're 3 times as voluminous as any other cell in the body, and the sensory system is 3 times as voluminous as the motor system. So you know that this is really important. Interoceptors take in information. Some of it goes to the somatosensory cortex. Some of it goes into the thalamus and then over to the insula. And in the insula, we interpret what we're taking in with a feeling. So we might all of a sudden become very, very cold. And we might think, oh, that feels so good because I was so hot before. Or we might think, oh, this feels terrible. I'm shivering. I've got to cover up. That ability to sense and put an emotion to the sensory input is made available to us through the interoceptive system. And the interoceptive system is embedded in the fascia. It uses the spinal cord as a mechanism to get the message up. But probably the most voluminous input from the sensory system is from either the sympathetic nervous system and the
Right.
sympathetic ganglia, which is fight or flight, or the vagus, the parasympathetic nervous system, primarily the vagus nerve. People come into us in hyper sensitivity for fight or flight. They're
Hmm.
hurt. They're
Right.
hurting. They want help, and they're what we call sympathetic overload. What our job is to calm down that sympathetic overload, because when it's an either or, it's binary. If your body's getting sympathetic, it's not getting parasympathetic, and the organs then suffer. You get chronic breakdown and fibrosing of lungs and hearts and gut, because it's not getting the kind of nervous system stimulation that needs for the cells to be happy and to talk to one another.
Right. Right.
Instead, all those messages are going to the muscles and the nerves, and you're getting ready to fight all the time. John says, look at them in traffic. Just everybody's just walking around there with they're just ready to attack.
And if you
And
look at the last few years in COVID, right,
mhm,
we've been in this
yeah,
fight or flight situation, and our stress levels, they're not coming down. They're here
right,
and they're bumping up, and they're coming down just a little bit and bumping right back up again. So
right,
we've been in
exactly,
this constant fight or flight for the last several years now.
right. So what we found out in this marvelous study was, with mimicking something like Barnes myofascial release, a myofascial therapist placed hands on a patient, and the patient had fMRI, a functional MRI reading of the interoceptive nervous system, the nervous system that was saying how relaxed they were or not.
Mhm.
So they got a baseline. And then the myofascial release therapist for 20 minutes practiced this mindful, attentive, myofascial release, allowed the fascia to open up. Then they took an fMRI reading, and it found out that the interoceptive system relaxed, and the person felt safer and more at home. The control group, same study, myofascial release, but the therapist couldn't pay attention to what was happening under their hands because they had earphones in that were clanging
Oh,
intermittently.
wow.
And all they could do was pay attention to the clanging, and they could not attend or have the same intention. And what happened was the interoceptive system did not ever relax. It stayed the same. And that is how research is showing us through the fascia. The interoceptive system is receiving information not just from us, but from our environment and through the energy of a person who's touching us. So now think back to if you were
Wow.
lucky enough to have a Bubba
Wow.
or a grandmother or a mom who just placed hands. My grandma Lucy used to just take my head, face in her hands. She'd say, I love you so much. Now, every time I do the TMJ release, I remember not just my grandmother, what it felt like when she did that. Now, that is going to translate into a kind of a compassion that cannot be um, replicated when you're thinking about what you have to do after work before you get home, or did somebody remember to take the dog out. When your mind is there, your hands might be doing the work. And that's why John Barnes always says, get out of your left brain, drop down into your body where your innate perception, your proprioceptors are. And he
Right.
would add, I'm sure, interoceptors now. It's the proprioceptors and interoceptors working together to bring about change. And we're not so much trying to fix fascia as we are trying to help it to be more efficient. Fascia will always work as efficiently as it possibly can in any one moment. So if I sit a lot, it'll form me in sitting, and I've got
Right.
to
Right. Right.
do my yoga and my Pilates to get out of the posture that it thinks it's supporting me in, because it thinks it's doing a good job keeping me stable and sitting.
Right.
But that's what we do, and then that makes Barnes significantly different from other forms as well. So the new science is looking at interoception. It's looking at communication. Um, They thought that they could, if they could find a way to soften the gel without the use of hands, like with a chemistry, with an injection, they might be able to treat breast cancer, because they found out that at least certain forms of solid tumors in breasts grow into malignancies because of a communication problem between the cell, the breast cell, and its surrounding fascia.
Right.
The fascia wasn't able to get the information into the cell and the cell out. And so the cell grew bigger. And so they thought, well, let's see what we can do to thin out that polysaccharide ground substance with an injectable, with a chemistry. And that's what big pharma does. We found out that it's really loving hands and connecting with
Right.
the vibration of the fascia and what it's saying to us.
It's the empathy. It's the empathy and the connection between in conjunction practitioner with the patient. Let's come back a little bit to what you just mentioned about John, and if you're not able to be with the patient at that time, and your mind is somewhere else on a shopping list, and the lack of, and John calls it channel 3 and channel 5. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how this method of myofascial release is so much different than others because of that?
Right. And one is not bad and one is not good. It's really both and. We use channel 5 diagnostic, our left brain, logic oriented problem solving brain, to try to figure out, for example, what's different. What do we notice that's different about this person this time? You know, every person is taken as an individual at this point in time. We're not looking to what happened last time with this person. We're not looking to say, okay, the randomized trials tell me with this kind of pain in the low back, this is what I have to do. No, we're looking at each person individually, and we're using our left brain, our diagnostics, to look at what the posture is telling us, what the gait is telling us, and then listening to their story. We're listening to their story with a kind of a commitment to listening to what's said and then listening to what's not said, the spaces between the words. And when we listen that way, our intuition is at work, and we might pick up something that it seems like that person's kind of hesitating a little. That's partly the diagnostic left brain, channel 5. However, when we approach that person's energy field and start to do the work, we drop down, John says, into ourselves. We take almost a meditative stance. We get out of that left brain. If you look at meditation as anything that gets you out of that default mode network, the
Yeah.
monkey mind, and
What does
into our
dropping
body,
down into your cell mean?
dropping down into ourself. Well, one of the best ways to illustrate it is to move out of the problem solving left brain idea and track the breath as it comes in through our nose and down into our lungs, and just kind of watch the breath come in and go down and into our body, and then back out again, and then back in again, and then
Yeah.
back out again. We're staying away from problem solving when we're doing that. And as we do that, then be very mindful that we're in somebody's energy field. They can feel us, whether it looks like we're touching them or not, we're touching them. Our energy is touching them.
Right.
And then we gently, very gently, place our hands and stay down in that channel 3, feeling from inside our bodies, out through our arms, up from the bottoms of our feet, out through our arms, into that person's fascial system, going down to where they push back, and then waiting, taking a breath, and then opening up our hands until we come to a dead halt. And then we're in communication. And then it doesn't help to try to figure out now what's happening. No, stay with it. What's the fascia trying to say to me? Oh, that feels a little bit more stuck up there than it does down here. And then a thought will come. What's going on in that scapula? I'm down here in the pelvis. And then you say, is something going on up in your shoulder blade, or do you feel this anywhere else in your body? And they they say, oh yeah, how did you know? I feel that up there. And
Right.
then that's the fascial voice. That's the information that's in the fascia coming into our consciousness, and we're able to interpret it through our knowledge in our left brain and our intuition in our consciousness and in our interoceptive system, and able then to act on it. in a holistic way.
Yeah, that's a fantastic explanation. Thank you. And thank you for mentioning the combination and use of both right and left brains in the world in which we live in, because we do need to have both. I find that our fascial system will, as you said, if we sit a lot, our fascial system will pattern to that. When we have regular movement patterns, drinking that cup of coffee every morning for 25 years, you don't really think about how the muscle memory works. It's automatic. And when an injury takes place and you have to figure out another way to figure out how to move, well, then a negative movement pattern or a compensatory movement pattern comes into play, and our fascial system will adapt to that. And
Right.
that might pull on one side, might pull on another side. And that
Right.
spider's web of connection is then how we gain access into that system and allow the system to melt and the gel to become more hydrated and softer in our movements. And then I have found through my years of doing this with you, and just for everybody else, Carol was the assistant instructor at my first class over 20 odd years ago. So we go way back, and Carol's been a mentor and a teacher, a friend, and for many, many, many years. And the one thing that we've learned together is we need to move. Our bodies are meant to move in multiple different directions, and our spine is meant to move.
Mm-hmm. And it's so erroneous to think of the spine as being a column. The spine is densities of bone, which is crystallized fascia, lying in a trough of fluid fascia surrounded by very, very tough fascia. And so you remember that person who came to us who had fallen off a horse, and she came to us for an intensive,
Yes.
and she crumpled her right leg or left leg underneath her. Well, we got a lot of the fascial restrictions loosened up, but when she tried to walk, she could not bear full weight on that left
Right.
leg. And that's a really good example of how the body will resist um, putting itself in harm's way again because of some misperception in the emotional nervous system, in the
Right.
interoception. And so what we had to do was, I think what we did was, we first got her on an inversion table, treated her, then got her on an inversion table and opened up 5 minutes of opening up that fascia and anti-gravity
Right.
um,
Remove gravity.
situation. And then we would walk with her, and I would take my hands around her hips. And as she came forward with that left leg, I'd press down to give her a proprioceptive input into the joint of her hip to cue her to take weight. And over time, she undid that negative learning because she had the muscle power. She just didn't have the emotional pattern. I've watched you work with people in beautiful ways to get them to be able to stand on one leg practically and bend at the knee and pick something up off the floor and turn around and put it behind them. And the functional exercises that you use are so creative, so much more
Thank you.
creative than sitting at equipment and opening and closing and opening,
Well, we
shortening your
know that
pectorals.
life doesn't exist at a machine.
No.
Life moves out in space, and there's no specific angle. We
Right.
need to be able to become masters of all of those angles,
Yeah. And
and
gravity treats us all the same way.
gravity's
Yeah.
always going to win. You mentioned the intensive program that we did with this woman after her horse injury. Tell us a little bit about the intensive programs, why they work, why they're necessary. Give us a little bit of a spiel on that.
Well, an intensive means more than usual, um, one 1 hour a day, once, twice, 3 times a week. It means more than 1 hour a day, usually 2, 3, and sometimes 4 hours a day of working with one person over a period of several days. John insists on 2 weeks, 10 days. Other places might not, but you're receiving myofascial release at least 3 of those hours, so that when we release restrictions, the body can't go back into life. And then let's say that there's a golfer who has a pattern that's interfering with the distance that the ball goes and the accuracy with which he hits the ball. And we find out that there is a twist in his thoracic fascia, but we don't think that that's the problem, because that twist was there when he first started and it didn't have the problem with the accuracy or the length of the distance. So what we did was found out that and this is a true story of one of my patients, we found out that the pelvis was rotated. And so I taught him how to de-rotate. And then if they came in for an intensive, what we'd do was we would look to see where the structural problems were. We de-rotate the bones, and might use softballs and rollers and so forth, and opening up the chest, because we tend to be, gravity tends to pull us in this direction. And we do what we can to open up to balance that out. And then over a period of days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, by Friday afternoon, we take before and after pictures, and their morphology has become more symmetric, and their pain is much less. And the look on their face and the emotion with which they speak of hope and possibility, and then they have their home program to take home and continue with the patterns that they developed during the immersion. It's usually at least two therapists doing this, and sometimes three. The peak experiences that I've had in being a myofascial release physical therapist have been with you, Craig, and with Tara Carrington in the immersions that we did from 2014 to 15 to 2019. They were very, very powerful experiences for me.
It's the immersions are truly amazing, and we find that not only are people coming in with a physical twist in a spine, whether it be in a thorax or in a pelvis, they might be coming in with a chronic dysfunction that has been 20, 30 years in the making, that has led to a fully emotional scar that that can be opened. A door can be opened, and they have the opportunity to step through and experience movement without pain, hopefully by the end of the session. And it's really a life-changing experience.
Right. Some of the most dramatic are the women who come in with a cesarean scar, that had a traumatic cesarean, an emergency cesarean, and all of the emotion and fear, and the regret and the pain of when they wanted to have a natural childbirth is stuck in that scar. And very often when we're doing scar release, the emotions start to bubble up, and you see the tears in their eyes, and they remember it as if it were yesterday. Because what we found out is the combination. We don't think it's just the nerves or just the fascia. We think it's the combination of the pattern of the web of emotion and sensation that was placed in the system at the time, stays gelled in that web. So it's a combination of the nerves and the fascia that because it's crystalline, it maintains a memory. It has a memory storage. So when we're moving electrons in that, those doors are open. The threshold is a very excellent metaphor, because they stand on this side, and very often they're afraid to go through. They're afraid to dip down and go into that pain and revisit. And it's not remembering, it's revisiting that pain and allowing that pain to speak to them, and putting words to that pain. Whatever trauma, whatever negativity, whatever, and especially if it was abuse, being able to shout out against the abuser, being able to find your power, not feeling powerless anymore, transforms people. They come out as different people from the sessions, and the gratitude is immeasurable. And then we get to just simply bask in their victories, because we were just following the principles and just doing what, with sensitivity and with compassion, doing what we were taught by this master, John Barnes, who figured it all out. And now the science is all catching up and able to explain it. And in fact, I have an explanation of Barnes myofascial release on my YouTube channel. I presented Barnes myofascial release for the Fascia and Pain Summit last year. And recorded it, and then John said, "Would you put that on your YouTube?" So I had to develop a YouTube.
Well, we're very, very thankful that you did. And, throughout our conversations today, you've mentioned some luminaries, and James Oshman and Candace Pert and Steve Levin and Jean Gambarteau, and
Gerald Pollack,
Jared
Jean
Pollack,
Claude. Mm-hmm.
yep, John Sharkey,
Yeah.
and Joanne Eveston.
Joanne Eveston.
And your name is right there at the very, very top, Carol.
Thank you.
Really putting this all together for us. So I'm going to link when we post this, I'll link all the information to these people, and obviously
Great.
I'll link the YouTube video as well to make sure that
Good.
everybody
Okay.
gets a good look at
Great.
it as well.
Wonderful. I
So,
appreciate that.
Carol, let's wrap up a little bit here, but tell me a little bit about the future of myofascial release and your role in it.
Oh, what an interesting question. Well, from the very beginning, I felt that myofascial release as a discipline, as a treatment modality, answered the main question: why are integrative therapies, energy-based integrative therapies, effective? Because it illustrates how the science works. For acupuncture, for Pilates, for all the holistic, subtle energy, moving the energy in the system of fascia and biotensegrity to produce healing, better integration in the system. So the future for me of all healthcare lies in those principles of understanding fascia and biotensegrity, soft tissue physics, not solid state physics, and the role of subtle energy, especially compassion and gentleness in the tissue, in changing things to bring about health and to restore balance. So to me, it is integrative therapies that are based on subtle energy and understand holism. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. It's not linear. And when you're working on one area, you're working on the whole area. When one thing moves, everything moves. Taking that into account, taking into account the science of self-organizing systems, of emergent properties, of complexity. All of that physics is at work in our systems, from stem cells, from the moment of conception until the moment of death, until we take our last breath. And then there, of course, is speculation that for those who believe that consciousness exists outside of us as well as inside of us, that when the body dies, that energy that is consciousness is never destroyed. And our cells might break down into carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, but they rejoin the soil. And that, depending on how long, is how you were buried. I'd like to be buried under a tree somewhere, wrapped in just a blanket, and so I can get my cells into the earth as quick as possible. And you can come to the tree and talk to me. That would be an ideal way to be buried. And you can give the eulogy at my funeral, and you can say that Carol Davis wanted to be buried under a tree, so we can go to the tree and talk to her. So that her cells, the organic components of her body, can return to where they came from, and eventually to the stars, because that's where we all come from.
And that's a whole nother conversation for another day.
Sure is. Yep.
And
that's the future too of fascia science. The future is the A.T. Still, who discovered fascia back in the night. Well, didn't discover fascia, but discovered it as a whole web. So Father Osteopathy said fascia is where the soul dwells, and Jaap van der Wal in his embryology course teaches that. It's the idea that there, whatever we call soul, it doesn't have to be spiritual. It's just a part of ourselves that has sentience and ability to become aware of who we are. When soul is connected to it, it usually means it's non-corporal. It's just energy, and it has some sort of sense of the transcendence, connection with that which is beyond us that we can't ever explain.
That's pretty
I know we
pretty
could go
amazing.
on forever.
We
Yeah.
you and I can have this conversation forever. And we've had
Yeah.
hours and hours and hours of conversation. Carol, what is your role? What are you doing next? What's on your agenda? Where are you going to be? Where can people find you? What's coming up?
Yeah, well, let's see. My main speaking engagements this year center around being my next one. It was with you, and last Wednesday I did a marvelous talk with James Oshman
Mm,
on where does the energy come from in biotensegrity. We had a discussion with the biotensegrity group. So I'm on a website called embodiedbiotensegrity.com, and you join, and it's
yeah,
a marvelous group of people that just talk about fascia and biotensegrity every Wednesday. And then on Friday, every once in a while, there's the biotensegrity tea party,
the Tea Party.
which is
Yeah.
the tea party. Everybody comes, there's one subject and experts on that subject. And so the person presents for an hour or so. Then it opens it up to discussion. And there are musicians and poets and engineers and all kinds of different people looking at tensegrity from their perspectives. We're looking at it as biotensegrity and what difference it makes in our particular manual therapy, movement therapy, or whatever. But the big focus for me this year is that I'm a guest lecturer at a school in Dublin, Ireland. And I'll be going to Dublin on the 4th of July for the week and talking in a postgraduate course for manual therapists that John has given special permission for me to teach Barnes myofascial release to these folks who have already a master's degree in manual therapy.
Right.
And I'm teaching them post-grad work in how is Barnes different from what they've learned. Mostly they've learned structural integration, Rolfing. And I'm going to be speaking about how what we do is different. And I'll be comparing and contrasting with the structural integrators as well. But that will be the first week in July. And then I'm doing online preparation for that in May and June. And then Dan Neville, everybody who's in Miami who's had acupuncture has heard of Dan Neville,
Yeah. We
has
love Dan.
NSEV website, and he's starting an academy. And he understands that what I've said before, that understanding fascia and biotensegrity opens up the scientific world for whatever integrative therapy you want to practice, whether it's acupuncture, which is his main area, but he's also looking at all kinds of somatic therapies and chiropractic and sound therapy and he wants me to be a lecturer in his academy as a kind of this is the 101. This is where everybody starts. This is the science where everybody starts, and then they branch out. And that will be starting later this year. I'll be giving a talk, and then a foundational talk that covers the energy before we're born, all the way down to the energy of resonance in and empathy in the therapeutic encounter, and everything in between. So it's all the
Wow.
scholarly work.
Wow.
You know, my work on empathy in the 70s. I did a dissertation on empathy, and then the work that I've done in quantum physics, and because I'm a twin, and my ESP that I share with my sister and I are entangled in this space and time, and then energy of transmission through the therapist and the patient, and the resonance, the wonderful consciousness, the flow and the connectedness that gives that glow to everything that we do, the extreme pleasure of how it feels so good to move into healing with each other.
Carol, you're amazing.
Lecturing from this room,
You're
and
absolutely amazing.
then on the road too. And I would love to come to Miami again, and I would love to do another immersion with you guys. I'm letting my Florida license go, so I'd have to do it as a lecturer. I couldn't do it as a clinician, but I'm available.
We'll make it happen for you.
Great.
Carol, thank you so very, very much for this. This is truly a joy. I love you dearly.
And I
And
you.
we're gonna do this again.
Okay,
We're
whatever.
gonna make sure we
It's always
do.
good to get together with you.
Always. I'm going to
Yeah.
turn off our
Blessings
camera
to
now.
Rachel and your families,
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
your
Thank you.
your daughters.
Thank you. Yeah, my girls. I'm going to shut off the camera first, and we're going to keep chatting a little bit offline here. So
Okay.
check it out, guys, as soon as we're ready to publish this out. Hang tight.